Welcome back to another Leadership and Legal Live with my co-host,
James Reid. Happy to be here. Thank you, Steve.
Everybody who's watching knows who James Reid is, so that's all good. Hey, so we've got yet another interesting conversation to have today. The whole purpose of Leadership and Legal is to talk about some of the topics that sometimes we don't want to talk about. That's kind of part of this thing. And other times just to get our opinions on general things that are happening. We've done that on a number of previous sessions. This one's a little bit different though, because we kept getting a lot of questions around leadership training, leadership development, all of that stuff. And we've had them come up in previous questions. And then so I did a little research on this, James.
Okay.
And by some estimations, companies spend $500 billion a year on some level of leadership training. But yet they keep coming back and saying it doesn't work. So today's session is titled Leadership Training Sucks, or Why Does Leadership Training Suck?
Sure.
So kind of broad brush, I'm gonna start with you. Like, what do you think is going on? Because this is a big issue.
It's a huge issue. I think that the timing is right because with the turnover and motivating employees and the workplace shortage, they're starting to say maybe it's a bad leader now for the first time, holding those leaders accountable, where they're starting to reflect as to what's going on. But I think the reason why leadership training has sucked is because a lot of companies think having a speaker for an hour once or twice a year solves the problem, and there's a lot more to it than that.
That's one of the things that keeps coming up is this whole idea of, I don't know how we could do leadership training as an event. Because my perspective is we're trying to change people's behaviors of a leader or somebody who's trying to become a leader. But yet then we throw all this information at one session and expect them to go out and be better leaders.
Right.
How do you change behavior in one session, to your point?
You cannot unless you give them tools that they're going to start using daily. I believe a habit, as you know from working out and things, is 21 days before you even start to develop those right habits.
Yeah.
And so if they're not doing 21 things, to apply those tools and those lessons learned.
Consistency over and over.
Correct. You're not going to be able to really apply what the training was about.
Do you get pulled in to leadership training quite a bit? And when you do, in your particular case, what's the focus? Is it all legal or is it beyond that?
So a lot of the successful companies I see devote, I think it's about 5% toward training.
Really?
So 5% of their, I think it's revenue, toward training.
It's a lot of money in some instances.
A lot of money. And so the legal portion of it is probably maybe 15% of that overall portfolio of training. And of that 15%, there's a variety of topics, but specifically on the legal side, it's more about leadership training of how managers can spot legal issues.
Okay.
And I think that the training from how to spot these legal issues, one is spotting them, but second is how to communicate effectively and address them. And I think portions of that training probably overlap with general leadership training without the legal.
Of course. So what's your general take on the purpose of leadership training? And I asked this with a specific question. I want to hear your answer first, and I want to give you kind of my perspective of it, because it was a question that got texted to me. And oh, by the way, if as you're watching this, if you've got a question, if you've got a comment, if you've got an experience you want to share, text it to either James or I. It's the easiest way since we're on multiple platforms. My number is 734-837-8500. Mr. James?
734-649-1313.
Okay, now go back to the question. Like, what do you think the purpose of leadership training should be?
To me, it's most people become a leader because they're really good at sales or they're really smart in their industry of their business, and that's why they become a leader. They don't say, hey, you've never managed people, you must be the best person at managing people, here you go. That's not how it works, right? So I think that a lot of leaders don't even understand an essential function of their job is actually leading people and managing people, and that in the job description may not even be there. They have the title manager, but they think, okay, I'm doing sales, I'm doing a target niche in the business.
Well, you bring up a good point. What's the difference between managing people and leading people? Is there a difference? From your perspective, and then I'll give you kind of my thoughts on both of these.
Well, I there is a difference, but from my perspective, I think leading is you're actually like leading by example.
Okay.
Often. And then I think managing means that you're essentially trying to delegate, but I don't know your approach. If you're trained enough how to do it in a way where they understand what they're doing beyond a paycheck.
Yeah, I look at it similarly, but I've got a little bit of a different spin, and I think this goes into why leadership training sucks, which is really the context of today.
Exactly.
Because I think we overlap management and leadership, and they're not the same. Management has always, to me, has been kind of managing through process. I'll give you an example. One of the first training programs, this is 30 years ago for me.
30 years, okay.
My first manager's training program was all about this sandwich process to providing feedback. Do you know what the sandwich process to providing feedback is?
Yes, throw a bunch of good things and then a negative and then more good, and you're like, what the heck happened?
Yeah, positive, negative, positive.
Right.
Ended on a good, and everybody's going to be happy, which I think is a bunch of crap anyways. Yep. But I used it for years and years and years and years. And to me, management is still about managing a process.
Okay.
The way I view leadership is a little bit different. There's so much leadership stuff out there about getting the best from your people. Sounds great. Let's get the best from, let's get the best from. We want our teams to perform the best. We want to do all the stuff.
Right.
But I think it misses an important difference. What about getting the best for our people and not just from our people? What are your thoughts on that? And what's the difference?
You're right, and I think that's what I didn't word it in that way, but I said I want those employees to know their purpose more than a paycheck.
Yeah.
And so how are these tasks helping them advance, helping them grow, helping them fulfill, their purpose, their mission, their goals? And I think it's a lot of leaders don't know what information to give them or not give them to make them engaged and be on the same page. I've been guilty of, when I'm managing people, I'll bring in one person for this small task, one for that, one for that. They have no idea how all these tasks fit together.
Yeah.
And I think they'd be more engaged and happy if they could see that big picture.
So if we agree that leadership, or part of leadership, is about getting the best for people,
yes.
How do we figure out, and I would ask all of you that are watching this as well, how do you figure out what they want? How do you figure out what's appropriate to get for them? Like if we're going to lead people to get the best for them, we got to figure out what the best is. How do we do that?
Well, one, we have to ask them.
There's a novel idea, right?
So I kind of think the legal overlap is when someone has requests for an accommodation, or you spot, even if they don't request it, if you see that there's a way to make them do their job even better, you ask questions and engage in the interactive process to try to explore accommodations or solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue, is that we don't ask the question of what does somebody want to be able to do? And I'm not talking about some altruistic purpose of I want to go save the world. That's great if you want to go save the world, but I'm talking about practical things that drive people, that are important to people every day, and then helping them achieve without doing the work for them. And I think most of the leadership training out there is all about how do I get Sally to give me the best? So who's it all about?
It's all about the leader.
That's why I think that at its core is one of the issues why leadership training sucks out there, because we're still so focused on what we want, not what the other person.
I agree, and I think to go back to your sandwich 30-year ago model, I'm still seeing that actually today, where people give those 2 compliments and then they hit them with something else.
Yeah.
And I think that part of it is it's a trust issue. So if somebody...
What do you mean?
So when someone says 2 compliments and then hits you with something else, in a way it kind of took away, when they say, you're great at this, you're great at that, but it's almost like they're saying you suck.
Yeah.
And so I think that you should almost approach it at different times, because now I'm like when they're saying you're great, I'm like, all right, what's the catch? Where can I not trust you? What are you really thinking? And
there's an ulterior motive at that point, and we pick it up.
And sometimes when someone goes to a leadership training, like I had someone go to a CEO leadership training, they come back the next morning, I see him on a Monday like, good morning, James Reid. And I was like, you've never said my name before in 10 years. I know you know my name. Did you learn that at your leadership training? That was awkward.
Yeah.
So I feel like you got to be yourself still.
Yeah, I do. You do.
I can tell something's up.
And it's that prescription of here's the process again, and that's where I think we end up going back to the kind of the management way. I want to manage. When Peter Drucker, the founder of Leadership Gurus, if you want to call it, it was so focused on the process of leadership, which I still think is management more so than it is leadership, because you're pegging it. It's based on trust. How do we develop trust with somebody? Honesty, right? Not in a negative way, but in a very positive way, with giving an appropriate way when giving feedback, when telling them good job, and all those other things. But I think one of the big issues is we don't teach our leaders how to build that trust, like tactical approaches to building that trust. So how do we do it? From your perspective.
So from my perspective, you got to build trust by having what I call healthy conflict. So if someone's not going to tell me I'm missing a button on my shirt or something, like I can't really trust them to tell me what's going on, what they see. They're just going to say what I want to hear.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I almost like people that say things that I don't want to hear all the time, because it makes me trust them more. And I think that when there is an issue, they won't be afraid to confront me with it.
I call it care and candor.
Okay.
On one side, you want to show people that you care, because that helps build a relationship and trust. And then candor is that honesty of, look, you're really struggling in this area. Let's figure it out together. Instead of, you're struggling in this area, you suck, get it right or you're out of here. And I think that's the mentality that we often create with some of the leadership stuff that we do. But I got a comment.
Okay.
I'm curious on this. So it says, trainers teaching leadership that do not have leadership experience is frustrating.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it goes back to the 101. I was just telling someone the other day, I hear these sales coaches that say, here's how you be great at sales, but I'm like, if you were any good, where are your stats? How come you never sold anything to anybody?
Yeah.
So I get it, sometimes.
That'd be like me giving legal advice.
Right? So
you don't want that.
Right. I think that you respect a lot more of people that have lived in the trenches and done it and overcame obstacles, so that way when I'm presenting here's what I learned, I'm more relatable to the audience. My stories are real and not just hypothetical academics. So I do think you have to have results to even be in that position.
Yeah, that was one of the comments that I kept getting over and over and looking at my notes is this, how practical is some of this stuff, right? Because if you've never actually done it, how can you teach it? And if somebody brings up a scenario, how can you address the leadership scenario if all you're doing is teaching from a textbook? Look, there's some really great trainers out there. Let's not take away from that, but there is some truth to that. If you haven't lived it, how can you truly teach it the right way?
If I was that, attendant or attendee in that event, I would not trust that person to fully listen and follow what they're saying as much as if they actually live that life.
Yeah, that is a challenge. I can see why it's frustrating on some people. What about people that aren't meant to be leaders, don't want to be leaders, but they're still going through leadership training because the company brings it in and says, James, you're going through leadership training.
It's funny you said that.
Uh-oh.
So I was doing a legal leadership training. I won't call it leadership, we call it management training.
Okay.
And I do a few anonymous surveys throughout the training, and one was how many got to this position because you're good at sales or good at your trade,
Common.
and how many of you want to manage or lead other people. And of the 100 people I was training, 10 of them said, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And it was in the anonymous survey. So now I'm working with HR and the executive team figuring out how to figure out who those 10 are, and we can find a way to not make them have to manage people, because that's where the lawsuits happen. If they don't want to have that direct accountability and conflict with those people on their team, they'll start giving work to whoever is happy to do it, and then those people think, oh, maybe I'm getting less work because it's my age. I'm going to sue for age discrimination.
Oh my
gosh. Maybe it's because I'm a woman.
I hadn't even thought about that.
I'm suing for sex discrimination. So those bad, I would say as high as 80% of lawsuits are from bad leaders because they.
Wait a minute, say that again.
80% of all employment lawsuits are from bad leaders because the employees are shocked when all of a sudden they're terminated or demoted or fired or some unfairness happens. They didn't see it coming, and rather than be accountable and they don't fully understand why they should be accountable, they point the finger at some form of discrimination. That's what I'm seeing.
That's painful to even hear.
It is so painful that up to 80% could be avoided if there was a leader that was, effectively communicating with those employees about the issues and what's going on.
So let's kind of parlay that. So, I mean, I think everybody kind of thinks and realizes that the return on investment of leadership training in particular is not there. It's just, that's why companies are spending $500 billion a year? You freaking kidding me? And then 80% of the lawsuits potentially have something to do with a lack of abilities of leaders. So when you think about what we need to be talking about, what leaders need to know, if you categorized a few things, what would be those key things around or what need to be involved in a real good leadership development program?
Every leadership program, number one, has to have tools. So I always make sure there's at least when I say tool, what I mean is like an actual one-page handout where they can start applying that tool retroactively to some hypotheticals. And I believe that the training, you and I don't just give the same training to every company that's the same. We would prepare in advance and cover the actual factual hypotheticals that are real.
Yeah.
And that way when you're talking about them, they're like, oh my God, that's happening to me. I'm like, I know, I found out. And so you have to cover hypotheticals and then use those tools to identify how you could have made that situation even better. And you have to apply it live at the training, and they have to continue doing it and use those tools afterwards.
So you just said something that I was looking at a note that somebody had sent me about the no practical application for some of the stuff that is being taught out there, because it's being taught out of a book or some other manual, and the one size fits all. I'm looking for my note on that. Somebody said something about, why does it feel like every leadership program I go into is a one size fits all? What you just described is not a one size fits all, though.
But I'm not the typical trainer. I don't sell widgets.
Yeah, got it.
I tailor them for product.
Okay, so we've got this tool, we've got this one sheeter. What are the other components, like from your perspective, that you've seen be effective? Obviously, there's a legal component to it. You've got to know some of the legal pieces to it, but expound on that and go in a little bit deeper.
Sure. So all the successful ones have what I just said, and then in addition, you have to include some element of a round table. So as my law school training is the Socratic method, where the professor asks questions that really facilitates the other C-suite and executives in the room for answering the questions with each other. And obviously, it has to be a top-down approach. The CEO has to fully be on board with what your goal is. And I see you at all your trainings, you always ask a lot of questions, because the way to really get the room fully engaged and tailor your training is to hear all the perspectives and perceptions and realities from the other trusted advisors in the room.
Yeah, I think that's critical, because I think every training program should have some key concepts, right? Mm-hmm. But where you're starting from with a person is different than whether I start with you or start with David or start with myself. We got to know where we're starting from. We got to know kind of where we want to get, and it's in the middle that we've got to customize. And I think too much of it is just, here's all the info.
Agreed. The data dump doesn't work.
It doesn't work. The Socratic method is interesting, because that's like, what's the Vistage? Vistage is built off of that, and a lot of others are built off of that same thing, which I think is missing. Okay, so that makes sense. What are the other things, again, from your perspective, to make, because we don't want leadership training to suck, and if you're out there watching this and you're like, okay, I know I need leadership training, and that's going to be another question. How do you know when you need leadership training? Here's what I need to go look for the next program. So some tools, some customization, understanding where we are. What are the other key components from your perspective that you think are out there? And I know this isn't what you do, but you see a lot of it. And you talk to a ton of HR people.
I see a ton of training and all of this. Well, the presenter has to be somebody that's relatable to the audience. Mm-hmm. And if it's a complete outsider that doesn't know anything about anything, sometimes if they're asking the right questions from a new perspective, it can be engaging, but for the most part, it has to be somebody that the audience will trust. And I think that you have to, like you said, share. I usually share in the trenches, here are the cases and scenarios I've handled in your industry, in your sector, and here's what I've done.
So it's relatable to them.
So it's very relatable to them.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's more storytelling than academic. Like here's what exactly happened, and here was the actual result.
Yeah.
And here's something else, with a different way, actual result. But I do think all of this comes down to a lot of soft skills that I think are not conscious. So like people have a tendency to, especially when you're a manager or a leader, you think you have to like point the finger down and hold and like you did that wrong and you did this wrong.
Yeah.
And
we've all worked for one of those, by the way. Every one of us have worked for one of those.
We've all worked for those.
Yeah.
And when I hear, from the HR perspective and saying like, no, the leaders are accountable for everything. It starts with them. Like, I'm accountable for not providing these tools and training earlier in this program. And I think it's the whole way of communicating.
I sat in on a virtual leadership training last week. I was asked to come in as to audit it, so to speak,
Okay.
or like you would do in college. And it was interesting because the majority of it was, and the person delivering it didn't even realize it, but it was all about that, you do this, I'm the leader, quote unquote, so I'm gonna tell you exactly what needs to be done and when to do it. And I'm kind of sitting back looking at it going, boy, if all we're doing is creating people that are directing,
Right.
no wonder people are leaving. Go to your opening comment around
right.
all the people leaving during COVID and so forth. That's not the role of, there's a time for a leader to say, here's what we're doing, let's march. But I brought this up in the conversation. So let's think about our organizational structures. You got it in the law firm, we've got it here, and everybody else has it, right?
Sure.
You've got the CEO or whoever's at the top.
Yep.
You've got, let's call it the lieutenants in the middle, and then you've got all the soldiers doing the work, right?
Sure.
Well, who's ultimately responsible in that model? Because if the soldiers don't do the work, it's the lieutenants. If the lieutenants don't do the work, it's the leader.
Right.
So I think we position the leader as more, don't take this wrong, is more important than the leader is. Because the leader can't do it without the entire army.
That's right. You're only as strong as your weakest link on the chain is what they always say.
That's another saying
Right.
that's actually out there. And that's, this person that was delivering this training, it was all about the general has all the authority, the buck stops here. None of those are false. But it was really the way it was presented. These were emerging leaders. These were new leaders, and majority came out of there thinking, "Man, I got to go tell my team to do this, and I got to do this, and I got to do this." I think there's a problem with that, as opposed to, let's get the team together to execute on whatever this vision is. Let me provide them the support to get the best for them. As a result of that, maybe they'll give us our best, as opposed to trying, again, going back to, I just want to get the best out of them.
And from the legal approach to that, there's tons of case law that says you can fire any leader in the chain even though they did nothing wrong. If anyone else on the team is dropping the ball or has an issue, slam dunk defense to lawsuits. I fired the leader because you're responsible for your team and you're
Really? So that's legally
a slam dunk defense to any. That's a performance issue.
Did you hear this?
And you hear that like you would fire a bad coach even though they aren't missing the shots, they're not scoring the goals. If the team doesn't win, the coach is responsible. And when you do that, and you tell those stories in real case law and real studies, the leaders pay more attention. Like, oh. You can't just say it's not my job. No, that's my job. That's my job. I'm responsible. We're in it together.
So that's an important distinction. I didn't know from a legal. I get the coaching analogy because I use that coaching analogy
Right.
all the time,
Sure.
or similar
Yeah.
to that. But I didn't legally. You can get fired just as easy as a coach can get fired if your team is not doing it.
Same thing.
So then our focus needs, and I know we say this, needs to be more on getting the best for our team so that they give something back to us.
Exactly right. You're not growing with it. And I've actually fired many people, and the essential reason is you're not growing with the team as we expected based on your experience.
Yes. No, that's entirely, and that's a good way to look at it. So so those are some good pieces to be part of. What else do we need? Anybody who's looking at this needs to be looking for if they need leadership development?
Well, I feel like everything we're talking about is kind of secondary.
Okay.
So my whole approach is the reverse seminar. So if somebody realizes they need training or thinks they're considering training, there's so much different topics and tailoring of training out there.
Right.
So I think we have to really come to the company and say, what is it that keeps you up at night? What is it that you're looking to accomplish? What is it that's going on? And tailor the training to actually that particular need, not say, hey, I do these things, you need this.
So I agree partially.
Okay.
And here's my challenge with it sometimes.
Sure.
And just to get your thoughts on this. Often CEOs, other senior leaders say, I don't need any leadership training, it's my team that does.
They don't even show up a lot of the time.
So they don't show up, so
Right.
it's all about the team, it's all about the team.
Yep.
So if I'm that person who says, I don't need it, but you need it, you're a member of my team, James, you need it, David over there up behind the video screen, David, you need it, but I don't actually need it. But then the consultant comes in to ask me about what I think I need, but I could be the biggest problem. So if I'm getting the direction of what you need from me, when I'm not even willing to continue to advance, am I potentially barking up the wrong tree as the person delivering the training?
So I think that the reverse seminar can't be just the CEO. It's got to be a list, almost like an investigation, a list of some other various people in various departments, maybe across the board. So like when I get to the HR department, I often hear exactly what you said. It's my CEO or my president that's causing all these problems. James, I'm going to give you some hypotheticals. They won't hear me out when I tell them that's not the right way to do it, or I have a different idea.
Yeah.
I need you as an outside attorney with, sharing lawsuits, why they need to change and pay attention, and here's a new approach. And so I actually do a fact pattern, and sometimes the CEO's like, okay, that HR made that hypothetical just for me. It clicks. And that's why they want me there, is to actually get the CEO to see a new point of view.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest. We've got to somebody good who's got the experience, who's gone through the leadership themselves, who's leading a business, who's done all of those things. They can come in and they can help assess some of and not just run blinded. I think we need this. The only thing that we need is to learn how to have difficult conversations.
That's right.
Okay, that might be great, but there's probably more to it that's causing that in the first place. I think that's critical. But let's approach it the right way by doing a little bit of investigation first, as opposed to just saying, hey, this is what they need, let's go, let's provide it. I don't think that works either.
I agree. And I think the other challenge with leadership training is HR has these titles, call it VP, and the VP in this office and the VP in that office have completely different jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And that the employees that they hire with the generic job description that HR gets is completely different at each location, or maybe based on each leader, or based on the strength. Maybe a good leader finds the strengths of their team and utilizes them in other ways where another leader doesn't. So how are we capturing, all of that information?
So, as we're talking, I'm getting the question. Leadership training to me seems like a lot of manipulation. Where we're trying to manipulate our people to do what we want them to do. We kind of touched on that in the beginning, but obviously this is on somebody's mind. So what's your take on that?
I agree. I understand the perspective,
Yeah.
and I think that if there's not trust, you're assuming it's manipulation. And so I think that you're right. We really have to focus our training on, I'm not just doing this to make life better for the C-suite, I'm making life better for you, and explain why, and how maybe they have the ability to advance, and the ability to grow, and the ability to lead others.
I also think it's about intent.
Intent.
I've said this a number of times, or anybody who's seen any of the videos that I put out there, but so if my intent is just to get for me, versus my intent is to, and I keep coming back to that because I think it's such an important distinction, my intent is to get for them. Now, think about it. Every day we have to make decisions about what we're trying to get for our team, from our team, and so on.
Sure.
If my intent is just to get something for me, they're going to pick that up very, very, very quickly, and it's going to break down the trust. It's going to all those other things that we talked about. But if my intent is to get something positive for them and for us, it seems like such a minor thing, but as leaders, I think we're always walking the line. Am I having them go to training for me or for them? Am I giving them this training for me or for them? Am I just trying to get something out of it? I think intent matters a ton. And as a leader myself, I find myself on that line all the time. Is my intent selfish, or is my intent for the right reasons? And I don't think we teach that, to be cognizant of the difference it makes when our mindset is, I just got to get more out of my team.
I agree. And intent does matter. And that's why when I can tell someone's heart's in the right place or they really want something for the right reasons, and they say something is slightly off, I overlook it. Where if I don't think their heart's in the right place, now I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on here? And you really hold that against them.
Yeah. What about personalities?
Personalities matter.
Leaders dealing with different. You have a different personality. I do. David does. Right. Jen.
Right.
Whoever else
That's
is.
right.
So, what's the impact that personalities play in leadership, and in particular, should we address that in leadership training, if we're not?
I think that we need to address it because it used to be we want to have, mini me's, everyone that's the same in the company, right?
Right.
And I think that employees want to be, accepted and appreciated for their differences.
Yeah.
It's like there's ways to appreciate, some of my personality traits and yours and how they're different, how we can both help each other be better. And I think it matters because as a leader, I have to sometimes, I've been told that I'm sometimes too direct.
No. I would have never said that.
So I think that knowing that and knowing that maybe certain personalities I'm interacting with, if there's, to go back to more basics, some people want to say, good morning, how are you, and how's your weekend going, and talk all about it. Other people are like, why are you bothering me? Let's get it done.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah.
And they want to cut to the chase. And I think you got to learn the personalities of your team and figure out how to make everyone comfortable and appreciated.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the core tenets that we miss in leadership training itself. It's all, again, it becomes very systematized and processed instead of saying, that's a pretty good example. I've got another one that I use my own kind of background, right? I had two individuals in the same spot here. They were both leaders in the organization. They basically split one of our departments in two. One of them has a type of personality that if I just walk up and had an idea and I'm like, hey, James, let's have this conversation, we'd like go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
That's right.
The other one, the exact same role, if I did that to her, she would freak. So what I need to do with her is to say, hey, here's an idea that I have, give it some thought and let's reconvene tomorrow.
Right.
Because they're wired completely different. And we can't just take a one-size-fits-all approach to leadership and just hit them both the exact same way, to your original point. The personalities, or the work drives, if you want to call it, that's what we call them, are a huge piece to a successful or a failing leader.
That's right.
And the reason we can see that is you could have, let's say there's 100 people on your team, 50 people love you as a leader, 50 people hate you as a leader. There's a good, I'm just making that up, but there's a good chance that they're wired differently.
There is.
In things like what you just described or what I described. And how do we build that in to make sure that we're covering that in some form with leadership development?
So as part of the leadership training, you might want to have a couple pre-workshop fact patterns handed out to them, so those that want a day or two to think through and maybe look at other resources, they can come prepared and not feel on the spot to have to identify all the answers. And I think that that's why the leadership training, there should be additional steps. Ideally, it's not just one training a year. You'll be able to have follow-up phase 2, 3, and 4 of that training.
It's that journey again.
It's that journey that you would continue on as well. And I think that you can actually take tests and understand their personalities and do a 360 and take action.
Based on whatever it says, and there's all that data is actually good.
Yes.
My CEO thinks leadership training sucks. Thank you for that, since that's our title today, right? Because there's no way to measure ROI. What say you on that?
That is 80% true with most trainings that I've seen. And I think it's because, especially, a lot of leading and a lot of HR is harder for most people to speak the CFO and CEO language because they're more in the HR and management field. And I think that I haven't seen many leaders do a great job at explaining the ROI. The way I try to do it is say, one lawsuit on average costs X.
Avoid the lawsuit.
Avoid the lawsuit.
Yeah.
That's my version of ROI, but I'd love to hear how you explain the ROI.
I think there's a couple of pieces. I don't look at it from a legal perspective because I'm not an attorney,
Sure.
thank goodness.
Right.
So I'll look at it from the perspective, well, two. Number one, is there greater engagement of the team? And that's an overused term, engagement. Look, I want to know if there's a relationship between the leader and their team after going through some type of leadership training, because I think that's a key component.
Yep.
If there's not some level of relationship, that's one. But two, if we're looking at it from a true ROI, numbers and cents, is the team more productive? Is, all those things that a great leader can inspire, and not motivate, but inspire in teams, is that happening? And if it's not, then I think we got to self-assess that leader, or that leader needs to self-assess themselves. So I do think you can put a number to it in terms of ROI on the productivity of the team in whatever form they're doing it. But I think we got to give them time.
You're right. It's not always the same year to see that ROI.
No, you got 100 people. Well, that's too many directs. Let's say you have 8 directs on your team, and by default they have 8 more. So there's 64 people plus you, 65 people on the team. By the time you develop a relationship, by the time you give them what they need, by the time you understand what's driving them, you're talking 18 to 24 months for that size team.
Yep.
Who wants to wait that long for an ROI? I think that's one of the other issues.
Agreed. But I want to go back to what you said. You're very popular in being a thought leader in this word, not that word. So you said inspire, not motivate. What did you mean by that?
I think motivate is manipulation.
Okay.
I'm going to give you an extra 1% in your commission today to motivate you to sell more. Okay, that's a little bit different than inspiring. If I understand the thing that's really important to you is to save for your daughter's college, and you only have a few years left, and I can help you achieve that, that's going to inspire you to perform. If I just give you that extra 1% for the hell of giving you 1%, I may motivate you for a period of time. But if I don't tie it to something that's important to you, it just becomes assumed that it's always going to be there. Assumed, we were talking about earlier about people that are just taking things for granted, right? I think motivation we take for granted, and it's to manipulate somebody to get. I think if we truly inspire people, it's because we know what's actually driving them.
So then the question goes, at your size company and many companies, that's doable, but what if you get so large where you're not going to have that relationship with every employee where you know about their need for college?
But I think that's the point of having leaders who actually do that.
So train the trainer.
Yeah, the CEO, there's no way.
Right.
Anybody at the top, you should know that for your team.
Yep.
But this is the other, again, going back to why leadership training sucks, because we do it for a small insulated piece and not for everybody so they're on the same page. Even in a company my size, I don't know it from everybody. But we're trying to get our leaders to a point where they're focusing on understanding what drives people. That's the only way to inspire people. And it's an overused term. Simon Sinek talks about it, the why and all this.
Sure.
That's so powerful. Motivation is temporary.
Got it.
Right?
So
I'm going to motivate David today by buying him a new camera. He's going to be thrilled for about 30 days, and then he's going to be like, it's just a camera. Nothing against you, David. You know that.
But that approach is, successful, but it creates another issue that
What's
I'm
that?
seeing. When you have many teams within your organization, is that leader doing what's, in best interest for their team, or are they always doing what's in the best interest of the overall organization? And what hat should they be wearing?
Well, I think they go together, right? Because let me put it this way: football team.
Yes.
You played sports, team sports, right? I played team sports as well. We knew what the purpose of team sport. What's the purpose?
Purpose is to win.
Oh my gosh. So here's where this gets muddy.
Yep.
If you or I go into an organization, and this is even true to a certain extent of mine, and I've been teaching this for quite some time, and you say, how do you know you win? You'll get 18 different answers from 18 different people. Then it starts becoming my team wins, but the overall company may not, because they don't cascade to each other. The special teams in football, right, they're still going after, they have a job to do, but it's in support of what? Winning. But if you don't know what the hell winning is, you're definitely going to have all these different factions out there. So my perspective is they've got to be able to come together. We know how we're winning. We know how my team supports winning. most organizations, the teams unfortunately don't even know what winning means. So how do they create an environment where their team is actually supporting that, and then they come up with their own goals. And they have their win, the company has their win,
Right.
this group over here has their win, and it's all kinds of silos.
Yep.
I think that's a mess.
I do too.
But that's a really great question, because unless it permeates across the organization based on the win, leadership training is going to suck.
And it creates sometimes dysfunction where if you have a great leader who's doing firm-wide praise, this person did a great job on this, and then the other leaders probably did 10 things better, but their personality is such where they aren't doing that. Now everyone else is like, well, they're better over there.
Well, it's I think we've in leadership we've got to separate style from ability though too, because you're right. You could have. It's kind of I got asked this last week, and maybe we've talked about this before. Who makes a better leader, an introvert or an extrovert?
I think you're probably going with introvert.
I'm going to say neither. I'm going to say I'm going to say both, because it's often assumed that an extrovert, at least this was the past, right? It's somebody who's got an outgoing personality is always going to be a better leader because they'll communicate better and so forth. The problem with that is by design, when we're really extroverted, social interaction is what drives us, right?
That's right.
And sometimes it becomes social acceptance.
That's right.
Right? Which is fine, but I never create a real deep relationship, because as an extrovert, we have thousands of friends, but how many real deep relationships do we have? At times, as an introvert, I may not have as many friends, but they're very, very deep.
Very deep.
So at times, an introvert is a better leader. At times, an extrovert is a better leader. So I do think we've got to be careful about pigeonholing, not towing. Those are two different things. Pigeonholing leaders based on they're outgoing or I think it depends on the rest of the team.
It does.
But how they deliver some of their stuff, we've got to give them some flexibility in style because of their own personality and work makeup. So that description that you said, somebody's going to be, always does public praise and somebody doesn't do that, could it rub people wrong? It could, but what if somebody on their team could give some of that public praise to those who want it? Mm-hmm. Because the flip side of that is, some of us leaders that love to give public praise, some people hate it.
That's right.
They want it in private because it means more to them. Mm-hmm. So we've got to be able to balance both of those things. This discussion should be part of every single leadership training.
Exactly.
Every single leadership training.
Yep.
And we're not doing it. At least a lot of what I see, we're not doing that.
And I think that the best training is really not giving every single answer. It's getting them to spot issues and think more so that they can find the resource, contact you or me, or contact each other and solve problems by spotting the issue. They're not seeing any of these issues a lot of the time.
I'm going to switch gears because this is going to go directly to you.
Okay.
Because I get asked this and I don't actually know, the legal answer to it. Mm-hmm. And I think we've talked about it a little bit. But, we're suggesting, or I'm suggesting, we've got to get to know our people. We've got to get to know what drives them. We've got, I think that's an important part of leadership. Yeah. But is there a legal boundary? How far, what can I ask? What can I not ask? Right? Because this needs to be part of leadership training too. Mm-hmm. Is there a line that I cannot cross as a leader when trying to get to understand what's driving my team member?
And I think that is the biggest insecurity and false perception leaders have. And I would say that there's none. All of those protected class issues.
Wait a minute, I can ask about your kids and what drives you with your kids?
Absolutely.
I thought HR tells me, nothing against my HR friends, I can't ask that kind of stuff.
You can ask all those things and you should.
What's the distinction?
And you need to. So one distinction is, if you ask it in job interviews, they're not yet on your team. So theoretically, if you don't hire them, they could say they just lost $100,000.
Because you asked me about my kids and I said I'm pregnant or whatever the case is.
I somehow unconsciously, that's why I didn't hire you.
Got it.
So it's dangerous to do before they're on your team. But once they're on your team, you get their driver's license, you see their birth date. You can, you can ask about kids, you ask about family, you can ask about all of those things. It's fine. There's really not even any type of risk. There's no adverse action. There's no claim without an adverse action. So you can ask any of those things. If you fire them the next day after they told you that they have kids, then there could be a claim. But what I'm highly recommending is empathetic leadership is almost a necessary leadership. When I do sexual harassment training, the executives go, okay, great, I'll never say good morning to a woman again, and I'm going to walk in my office like this. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Just like say good morning to everybody, not just the attractive person in the room, and be equal opportunity. So you need to ask those things, but what you should do is ideally have a board that decides who to do a promotion or demotion or adverse action to. So it's not just me potentially factoring.
Who knows that information?
Who knows that information?
Got it. That makes sense. I got asked this last week, and I wasn't sure of, or 2 weeks ago, I wasn't sure of the legal ramifications. I know we addressed it a little bit. You and I had this conversation, but I think it's a falsity that has been taught out there. So a lot of the leaders are like, I can't get too close.
Right.
If that's the kind of leadership training you're going through, I think it's back to management and process as opposed to people. Leadership is about people.
Good distinction.
Right?
That's right.
You got to know what's driving people. The only way to figure it out is to ask them. Then I think one of the other pieces that we've got to make sure we do as leaders is to have them define what's important to them. Here's the difference.
Okay.
How do you if I said to you what was driving you and you said career advancement, how do you define career advancement?
Like individually?
Yeah, you. James Reid. How do you for you define career advancement?
For me, it's moving up the ladder compared to how I performed last year.
You want to run the firm at some point, or is it just in dollars booked and in clients brought in?
That's a great question. So that's the common question that's often asked as you grow. I guess maybe I want to be asked to and then decide.
David back there, what's career advancement mean to you?
Ooh. Always making progress on my abilities, editing abilities, directing abilities, storytelling abilities.
So you're all about storytelling abilities, directing abilities, video editing. Both of you, career advancement's important. I know this.
Yep.
But the definition is very different. So this is why I say as leaders we need to make sure that we understand the person's definition. So if you just say career advancement is the thing that's important to me, what the hell does that mean?
It's different for everyone. Yep.
But this is where I don't think we're at. We're not teaching our leaders to ask enough questions. Leadership is not about just doing. It's about asking. It's about understanding. It's about listening and figuring out what the hell's driving you in the first place, right?
100%.
And I think we're missing a lot of those things. Look, I think there's a lot more to be said, though, about the kind of the legal pitfalls of this. And I would suggest, and for those of you that are watching, I think it probably would be very valuable to you that if in a subsequent session, James, you could come in and talk about, hey, let's talk about the common management leadership pitfalls that need to be addressed that gets leaders into trouble.
And I would love to do that, number one, so thank you for raising that issue. And I think at a high level, which I didn't get to, is after all of my training, Steve, I will get at least 10 people that come to me privately and share an issue they have or a factual hypothetical that I think wasn't properly, heard by others on the executive team.
Yeah.
And so I add the ability of being able to, I think, facilitate that healthy conflict and continuing that conversation to improve perceptions. And there's attorney-client privilege if there's skeletons in the closet.
Well, and I think that's an important distinction too, that you're
Right.
that you're a service that you're able to do. But I'd love to have you come back and talk about, here's the 10 legal issues that we need to be encouraging our leaders to understand and be cognizant of, where so they don't do something a mistake that they just didn't know about.
Exactly.
And I think that's a key component to leadership isn't just about the legal side, it's about the people side, obviously, but you can really screw things up if you don't understand and have an appreciation for the legal side.
I would love to do the top 8 issues that leaders need to be aware of from the legal side.
So let's make sure we get that on the docket. There's also, there's a lot of talk about the future of work.
Okay.
So we're being asked for the next session if we could broad discussion, like what's the future of work? We were having some of this before.
We were.
What happens in a year from now when the economy takes a dump, and it will, whether it's now or in a year from now, we know this is going to happen. What happens to compensation? What's the future of work look like? Is it going to stay remote? Is it not going to stay remote? I think that'd be an interesting conversation to have as well.
I love how we're planning out the year. I'm excited.
So we can start building up. Look, and I think what we may do is we'll do future of work next, and then we'll do the legal ramification, or the legal things to consider from leadership, just because it's being asked. If if you've got some thoughts, if you're watching this and you've got some thoughts on the future of work in particular, since that'll be our next one, and you'd like to come into studio and have a healthy debate on some of this, because I know for a fact on this one, you and I are going to differ because you're going to come at it from a legal perspective. I don't understand the legal side of things. I'm not going to, and I think there's going to be a little bit of healthy clashing.
I love it. I'd love to have a third.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If you want to come in, have the conversation with us, talk about your opinion. This is not you can be based in fact for sure, but this is going to be a bit more of an opinion. Where do you think that things are going to go? What does the future of work look like? Reach out to James or myself. Send us an email, post online. We've got people watching all the different social platforms. It'd be a really interesting conversation. I think we're trying to do it June 27th.
All right.
At 11 o'clock. So that should be on both of our calendars already. Again, if you've got some thoughts around the future of work, reach out to myself, 734-837-8500.
734-649-1313, and it's on my calendar.
Perfect. So keep in mind, these topics that James and I and others talk about generally come from your comments. There's a question that's asked, and it's like, okay, let's have this dialogue. Just in kind of recapping, there's no doubt that leadership training is needed. There's also no doubt that generally speaking, it sucks because it doesn't cover the things that we should be covering, and I don't think it's in the format that it should be in the first place. So if you've got additional questions on this, reach out to us as well. Otherwise, June 27th, we'll be back. Maybe we'll do it in the Steve Man Cave.
I would like that.
So we're going to do a little different venue. We're painting today, so hopefully it'll be done by then. It'll be a little more casual venue. June 27th, you want to come out to my man cave, you are officially invited. Not all of you, but if you want to join make it a threesome or foursome or something like that to have this dialogue, you're welcome to come out to the man cave in Milford, Michigan.
And what about those introverts that may want to watch but not be on the air? Is that also okay?
There's
for
enough
some
room
guests?
for about 20 people.
All right.
So if you want to come out and you want to be the peanut gallery and send notes and questions and stuff, you're welcome to come out. We'll make a fun time of it. It'll be the grand opening of the man cave, and who knows, maybe it becomes the Qualigence Man Cave. We'll go for the Leadership and Legal Man Cave. L&L logo at the top.
Yeah, and you have to make the environment comfortable to talk.
You do.
So I like it.
So it'll be a little bit more casual. But thank you for joining us, James. Thank you as
Thank you. Always fun to see what's hot, out there and all the questions. And I'm glad we had some conflict today.
Yeah, there's healthy.
Healthy.
Don't have to agree on everything. This has been another Leadership and Legal. David, thank you for manning the booth behind there with all the video and everything else. We couldn't do it without David and rest of the team. But signing off, you guys have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time at the next Leadership and Legal Live.
Thanks again.